Today we have a documentary on World War II.
How are your actions different in entering World War II from World War I?
When I was elected into power, I promised that I would not enter any war. I saw that people felt strong about fighting in the war and supporting the European countries. I took a vote of parliament to see who thought we should enter the war. The decision was unanimous. I was still disappointed in the decision, though, even though it was a great thing to help out our allies. I don't like the fact that it would be Canada's war and second war in 20 years. Many people thought that we were pressured by Britain, but it was all on our own power. I think many Canadians proved to go to war because we still had family or just moved from a European country, so they felt it was necessary to help them out. We're also in a rough time with the Great Depression. In World War I, Canada was given many job opportunities because of munition productions and other factories producing war necessities.
How were you able to handle a conscription crisis and not upset the pacifists?
I promised when I was elected into power to never put any conscription laws. But as Hitler began to dominate Europe, many Canadians were worried that we didn't have enough soldiers to fight the war in Europe, and talks of an invasion of North America were high. At this point, I decided to take a vote from Canada to see how many Canadians were in favor of conscription. A majority of Canadians were for conscription, but I knew if I sent everyone overseas, I would have to deal with riots from pacifists. To prevent more home front problems, I started the National Resource Mobilization Act, or the NRMA. The NRMA trained soldiers for home defense in case of an invasion, but they were never sent overseas. After training the soldiers could enlist into voluntary enlistment overseas. By the time we needed more enlistments, the war in Europe was dying down, and only 2,500 reached the front lines, and only about 70 died in action. I received some hostility, but I had no other options, and I held off on conscription as long as I could.
Do you believe Canadians were successful in the D-Day operation?
Yes, I believe our troops were very successful. They were very successful because the attacks were well planned out. We had learned from our lessons in the Dieppe invasion. The French beaches were bombed to clear all German defenses off the beach. Not all the defenses were clear, however, we still faced some resistance on the front lines. Canadians were the most successful out of all the Allied soldiers. Our troops successfully pushed German forces back 5 kilometers to the French city of Caen. Canadians' losses were less than most other Allied troops as well. Because Canadians were able to make it inland, we were one of the reasons that the Allies even got to put a secure foothold in France.
How did you feel about appeasement?
I didn't like the fact that Hitler was making choices that broke the Treaty of Versailles. But when I thought about it, if we were going to punish him further, we could be dragged into another war. When the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain came up with the idea of appeasement to negotiate with Germany, I thought this was reasonable. In 1937, I flew to Berlin to meet with Hitler himself. He seemed like such a nice and trustworthy man and did not want to provoke another war. He just wanted to stand up for his country's rights. Shortly after, I contacted Chamberlain and told him my thoughts on Hitler and agreed that he could be appeased. The problem was that Hitler was able to pull off a very innocent act and agree to the new terms and make it seem that he was fine with the agreements. But Hitler still craved revenge on the Allies' forces. He would not stop at the little that was given back to him. He wanted all of Europe in his command.
What was Canada's role in the atomic bomb that ended the war?
Canada had a very important role in the making of the atomic bomb. If it wasn't for Canada, there would be no atomic bomb, and many lives would be lost in a land invasion to end the war. The main material in the atomic bomb is uranium. All uranium mines were under Nazi control in Europe. The only available uranium refineries was the El Dorado refinery in Port Hope, Ontario. No uranium would have meant no bomb. And we also suspected the Axis powers working on the nuclear weapon of their own. Although we didn't have any part of dropping or designing the bomb, we provided the materials necessary to build it, which is a key contribution. Unfortunately, as devastating as the bomb was, we still saved lives. If we had to invade Japan by land, we would have lost double from what the bomb had killed.
Now it's ginger upper time for us. Thanks, Annie.
Okay, Tag. Tag and I sure would like to have you join us in a bottle of Canada Dry ginger ale. Try it. It makes you feel so wonderful. Right, Tag? Just pick up a carton of Annie Oakley's favorite, Canada Dry ginger ale.
How was your life impacted as a result of working to support the war effort on the home front?
Well, after the war broke and Lily went overseas, I was left to take care of the 3 children at home. I thought to myself, what would I do with the children once war broke out? You see, the government wanted us women to replace our husbands and brothers that were overseas. They began to give out tax breaks and daycare service as incentives for us to join the labor force. I grasped the opportunity to work in munitions productions, producing only the top Canadian quality that supported all the Allies. I really changed as a person from working in munitions productions. I found more confidence in myself, and women like myself were treated with more respect and had a greater role in society. You could say that I became a Bren girl.
As a woman contributing greatly on the home front, how do you feel your contribution compares to the soldiers overseas?
Our jobs really went hand in hand. Their contributions were supported by us women producing the munition on the home front. And it wasn't just the Canadians we were helping. We were producing the munitions for all the Allies. We really kept the economy running, and munitions productions helped to vanish the unemployment of the Depression. Of course, the soldiers overseas had to go through the nightmares of war, for which we can only always be grateful for. I strongly believe that during the war, whether it be someone like me working on the home front, some of my friends that worked as nurses overseas, and of course the men fighting on the battlefront, we all had a role to play in our common goal of victory for the Allies.
What role do you believe women in the workforce during World War II had on women's rights?
I believe that we had a major role in the development of women's rights. When we got the opportunity to work in place of our brothers and husbands, we needed to maintain their quality work. I believe the government and society saw the Bren girl as the future of women, and we showed the government why we should have an equal role as men, because we were performing just as well as them in the workforce. I believe that the Canadian government had trust in women, and because of that formed the Canadian Women's Army Corps and Royal Canadian Air Force in 1941. We were now given a role to play on the home front and the opportunity to prove ourselves overseas. 45,423 women joined the wartime forces, fully demonstrating that women were up to any task. These services paved the way for women in the future and proved to people that women were not the fragile creatures the men made them out to be. Although these services were cancelled after the war, they laid down the foundation for the success and development of women's rights in the future.
What were your thoughts on the increasing role of women in the military? How did it directly affect your life?
Just like any other woman, I was proud of women's contributions overseas. I saw it as a step in the right direction for women. The creation of the Canadian Women's Army Corps certainly played a large impact on how women were seen in society. Men thought more highly of us because there were over 40,000 women and 5,000 nurses overseas in 1945. We were also part of the significant changes in gender and racial attitudes that compose the Canadian military. Many of my friends began joining unofficial service groups that taught them how to do things such as driving trucks, reading maps, and operating equipment. Several of my friends and people I cared about joined the Canadian Women's Auxiliary Air Force. This tempted me to join, but I felt that I was better off on the home front where I could see my children. Of course, more women overseas meant more worried mothers and sisters that feared that their sons and husbands would not return home, but now also had to bear the consequences of their sisters, daughters, and some of my friends not returning home from the war.
We will be right back after these quick messages.
Well, here are a couple of young wrestling buckaroos. It's all in good, clean fun, helping to build strong bodies. But oh, the energy it takes. Speaking of energy, here come the replacements. Here's a little girl who knows that Canada Dry Ginger Ale, besides being wholesome and delicious, is just the drink for quick energy. A perfect way to recharge young batteries. And man, don't those youngsters go for it. They love that different, delicious flavor of Canada Dry Ginger Ale. They like the way it makes them feel refreshed in a hurry. And so does everyone else. Millions of people are switching to Canada Dry Ginger Ale because they found out for themselves that it's the best of them all for flavor, for purity, and for quick energy. How about it, youngsters?
You said it. Canada Dry Ginger Ale is my favorite. Me too. Canada Dry Ginger Ale is tops.
Guess that cinches it. There's just nothing better than cool, refreshing, delicious Canada Dry.
What stereotypes or difficulties did married women as yourself face during the war?
Well, of course, women were never treated as equals to men. Our role was always believed to be in the kitchen as a housewife, and this proved to be true even after the war, when the Canadian government passed laws to force women from their work positions. Although during the war it did seem the divisions between men's and women's work were beginning to blur. Women, as myself working in munitions productions, were actively seen as something of a national heroine. Instead of our stereotypical long dresses that men saw us in, wartime workers such as myself wore trousers and a bandana wrapped around our head. This change in appearance helped to eliminate stereotypical differences between men and women. Traditional stereotypes were maintained that women didn't work as well as men, and this could provide an explanation as to why we weren't paid equal wages. Also, our bosses were almost always men, another stereotype that women would not be proven in leadership roles.
Looking at all the battles, in your opinion, which battle do you think had the most decisive impact on Canadian autonomy, and explain why this is?
That's a hard question because all the battles were important for their own reasons. In my opinion, the liberation of the Netherlands in September 1944 had the most decisive impact on Canadian autonomy. When we were overseas, it really changed the way I appreciated our country. The people of the Netherlands were so grateful for us to come into their country and protect them from the Nazis. It made people think of how great a country Canada is. The battle was a huge step forward for Canadian identity. Canada single-handedly forced the Germans out of Holland, saving thousands of lives and creating hope for the civilians of the Netherlands. We fought with pride to make life better for our loved ones back home and to show people that Canada is a strong enough country to fight for themselves. I'm glad to say that my battalion and I created a better Canada and hopefully a stronger country for years to come.
Do you think that Canada's actions overseas affected Canada's home front negatively or positively? What factors could have caused the change?
World War II had many good moments for Canada. Our strength and pride in the battles carried over to our home front. As we were successful in our battles, it made other countries more interested in our nation, leading it to new wealth and industries. In battle, our heroic actions made our home front stronger because it let people know that we were coming out on top overseas. Through Canada joining the war, it was not just to help our fellow allies, but it also would create tons of new jobs, which means our economy would become stronger drastically. Many factories opened up because of the overseas need of weapons, machines, and artillery. To properly answer your question, in my opinion, it positively affected Canada's home front, since our actions overseas have been looked at all and it has done to make Canada more independent and led us in a great path for many years to come.
Being a black soldier, what hardships did you have to overcome to prove yourself to the rest of the military?
During my time in the military, I encountered several hardships. Most of all, the hardships had to do with my color. The men in my battalion did not feel that blacks could do their role in the military. I had to listen to men being racist and saying terrible things about me and my fellow black soldiers. Several times it came to violence and abuse towards me. The military did nothing to really stop it. Most officers were white. In training and overseas, there was a clear barrier between the white and black soldiers. After Ortona in 1943, the perception of blacks in the military changed drastically. Of course, there was still segregation, but the white soldiers sort of forgot about color and started to treat us like humans. Overall, World War II was extremely hard for black Canadians, but in the end, we changed the way people saw black Canadians in the military.
How was the treatment of black Canadians different from World War I to World War II? Do you think that racism in the future wars will be unheard of?
Looking back in time, the treatment of blacks did not change too much. In World War I, the recruitment offices would always turn down black men because they believed it was a white man's war. The huge difference is that in World War I, blacks were not allowed in combat. They were only used to bring supplies from the back of the trench to the front lines. As of World War II, the Canadian military decided to let black Canadians fight only due to the shortage of soldiers overseas. Throughout World War I, blacks were treated terribly by many white people. Even though many were turned away from the recruitment offices, they still wanted to be a part of the war, so they worked in factories and volunteered in hospitals and as laborers. As our country evolves and people face the fact that we are all equal, I think that racism in the military will be completely gone and everyone will work together to fight.
As a result of the Canadian military protecting the Netherlands, how do you think this changed the world's outlook of Canada as a country?
After we came out of the Netherlands, people started to thank us for our bravery and hard work. The people of the Netherlands were extremely grateful for all we did when we were deployed there. All I can remember was that there was an order to push German troops out of the northeast of Holland and back into Germany. But after the battle, we had casualties close to 7,600 men. We all risked our lives to protect the civilians of Holland. It drastically changed the way people of Europe respected Canada and its military. I never saw it, but one of my friends said that when he was in the Royal Air Force, the Dutch would write "Thank you, Canadians" on the roof so we could see it as they flew by. In the end of the battle, people thought of Canada as a country that would help the weak and put other countries before them. As a soldier fighting in the Netherlands, I will never forget the happy faces of the people that we helped.
Hi,
Oh, hi, honey.
that's my man. The fellow who invented do-it-yourself. Or maybe it just seems that way. As for me, there are certain things I'd much rather not do for myself. Take driving. I want my car to do most of the work for me. And that's just what my new Ford with optional power assist does. Let me show you. Remember when parking was so much trouble? Well, with Ford's Master Guide power steering, all turning is as easy as this. Nothing to it. Here's something that's exclusive to Ford in its field. A four-way power seat. Not only does power move me forward or back, it can move me up or down to give me my most comfortable driving position at the touch of my finger. And with another touch here, I can raise or lower all four windows without moving from my seat.
How did your family, being of the Japanese descent, maintain a good standard of living in the early 1940s?
There were always negatives about being Japanese people living in Canada during the 1940s, and it was not always easy to have a great standard of living. When we arrived in Canada, in British Columbia to be more specific, there were not many job opportunities for myself. I started to make some money by working on the railways, but I was not paid a high amount of money for this hard labor. Then, I began to work in lumber camps, and I was a miner for a period of time, but I still did not enjoy the amount of money I was receiving. It was unfair. Finally, my wife and I decided to move to the coast and purchase a small home so we could have a place to eat and sleep. I saved enough money when I was back working as a miner so I could purchase a fishing boat, and that's how I made a living, by fishing. It was relaxing and not as hard as mining every day, but the only downfall of the job was that I was still insulted by the so-called true Canadians because I was a Japanese Canadian.
Put yourself in a Canadian's shoes. How do you think they thought of you since you are Japanese?
Japanese people living in Canada during the 1940s were never looked at as high-class people, and they had no power. Every day, Canadians living in British Columbia always treated us with very little or no respect at all, and they did not want us to have a prosperous life. We were treated as minorities. A piece of garbage was treated with more respect than we were. We were unable to vote for what we believed in because we were lower-class citizens, and Canadians never gave us Japanese people fair wages or opportunities when it came to the workforce. When Japan attacked Hong Kong and Pearl Harbor, we were looked at as people who were spies that were going to destroy Canada. We had no intentions of doing that. I just wanted to live a life in Canada because there were plenty of opportunity for myself and my family. But as you can see, being a Japanese person in Canada was tough, and Canadians thought of us as worthless enemy aliens.
How did the treatment of Japanese Canadians shape Canada's identity at home?
People of the Japanese descent living in Canada were not treated well at all. The way that Canadians treated us was unbelievable. I've never been treated worse in all of my life. We were called enemy aliens and spies because Canadians thought we were going to try and attack Canada. Meanwhile, all we wanted to do was maintain a balanced lifestyle. I, being a male Japanese person in Canada at the time, was taken away from my family, and I was put into an internment camp without my wife and kids. Later on, my wife and children were taken into a different internment camp, and we were separated for quite a while. The places that the Canadian government gave us to stay in were brutal, and my shack did not have any running water. We were then deported back to Japan after a law was passed in Ottawa. All in all, the treatment of people of my culture in Canada during World War II was terrible, and it shaped Canada's identity at home awfully.
How could have Japanese Canadians helped overseas during World War II?
Most of us Japanese people living in Canada would have been more than happy to join the war effort to help out Canada because it would have been our way to repay Canadians for allowing us to stay in their country. Canadians could have used us to help defeat Germany's fierce army and contribute to the Allies' success. Us, Japanese people, could have helped Canadians during the liberation of the Netherlands, and the amount of Canadian deaths would not have been more than 7,600 men. We also could have helped Britain and Canada defend Hong Kong, but we were not able to go to war and Hong Kong was surrendered to the Japanese. Dieppe was a failure and everything went horribly. We could have helped out there as well, so there would not have been more than 900 Canadian deaths and there would not have been 2,000 Canadians taken to Japanese prisons. Japanese people in Canada could have played a significant role in the army during World War II, and they could have helped the Allies defeat the Germans.
How did the way that Canadians treated Japanese Canadians contribute to Canadian autonomy?
Canadians treated us Japanese people with no respect at all, which did not lead to contributing positively to Canadian autonomy because of the fact that Canadians treated us like garbage. I was loyal to Canada and I would never try to destroy Canada, ever. I also was a follower of the Red Cross, and I would also be ready to battle for Canada anytime that the Canadian government needed me. However, Canadians did not see us this way, which was unfair to us Japanese people because we wanted to support our country, Canada, and help contribute to Canadian autonomy overseas. Canada did a poor job in treating Japanese people in Canada during World War II, which had a bad impact on Canadian autonomy. Canadians are lucky that they were successful for the most part in World War II, or else the treatment of Japanese people in Canada would not have been taken lightly. This is because a loss in the war means a loss in land, and Canadians will regret not sending us Japanese people to help out overseas. Overall, the way that Canadians treated Japanese Canadians during the World War II had a negative impact on Canadian autonomy.
As you can see, World War II both positively and negatively shaped Canada's reputation at home, overseas, and contribute to Canadian autonomy.